Every morning, millions of people with type 2 diabetes eat breakfast, take their medication, and do everything their doctor told them to do. And every year, their insulin resistance quietly gets worse. Not because they're failing, not because they're lazy, but because the treatment plan they've been handed was never designed to fix insulin resistance in the first place. It was designed to manage the number on the test, while the real problem continues, untouched, deep inside every cell in your body. Today I'm going to show you 5 vegetables, each one backed by published clinical research, each one working on the exact biological mechanism that your medication is not addressing. And by the time we reach number 1, the vegetable your own doctor has access to in the very journals sitting on their desk, I want you to ask yourself one question. Why has no one told me about this before? I want to tell you about Margaret. Margaret is 68 years old, a retired school teacher from Columbus, Ohio. She's had type 2 diabetes for 9 years, on medication since year 2. Her doctor increased her dose twice. Her A1C has been hovering between 7.4 and 7.9 for the past 3 years. Despite the medication, despite cutting back on bread and sweets, despite walking every single evening after dinner. At her last appointment, her doctor added a second prescription. Margaret asked a question that stopped her doctor cold. She said, "Which of these medications is actually fixing my insulin resistance? Not just managing my blood sugar, actually fixing the resistance." Her doctor paused. "They manage the blood sugar," she said. "The insulin resistance is a separate issue." Margaret left that appointment with a new prescription, a higher copay, and no answer to her question. The answer exists. It has been published. It is sitting in the medical literature right now. And it grows in every grocery store in America. What I'm about to show you is the clinical evidence for 5 vegetables, ranked from 5th to 1st by what the research actually shows about insulin resistance specifically. Not just blood sugar, not just A1C, insulin resistance. Before we get to the vegetables, you need to understand what insulin resistance actually is. Because most patients have been given the number, but never the explanation. Here's how it works. Your cells communicate with insulin through a receptor on their outer surface. When insulin binds to that receptor, it triggers a signaling chain inside the cell. That chain opens glucose channels. Blood sugar enters the cell. Energy is produced. Blood sugar drops. Insulin resistance means that signaling chain is breaking down. Insulin is still binding. Your pancreas is still producing it, often working overtime to compensate. But the signal fires weakly. The glucose channels open slowly, or not at all. Blood sugar stays elevated. Your doctor reads the number and calls it poorly controlled. What's causing the breakdown? 2 main culprits. First, chronic low-grade inflammation. Inflammatory proteins, specifically TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, directly disrupt the insulin signaling chain inside the cell. They damage a protein called IRS1, which is a critical link in the chain. That inflammatory state is driven by elevated blood sugar, abdominal fat, oxidative stress, and processed foods. Second, something called ceramide accumulation. Ceramides are lipid compounds, fat molecules, that build up inside your muscle cells and liver cells. They block a protein called AKT, which is the central switch in the insulin signaling chain. When ceramides block AKT, glucose can't enter the cell, no matter how much insulin your pancreas produces. Your current medication addresses neither of these mechanisms. It manages the downstream consequence, elevated blood sugar, while both of these root causes continue doing their damage. These 5 vegetables work upstream, at the root. And here is where the case begins. Number 5. Spinach. Spinach is number 5 on this list, not because the evidence is weak, but because its mechanism is one step removed. Spinach works on insulin resistance through magnesium, and the connection between magnesium deficiency and insulin resistance is one of the most thoroughly documented relationships in all of metabolic medicine. Here's why it matters. Magnesium is required for over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. One of the most critical is insulin receptor tyrosine kinase activity. the specific enzymatic step that fires the insulin signaling chain after insulin binds the receptor. When you're deficient in magnesium, that enzymatic step works at reduced efficiency. The signal fires partially. Insulin resistance deepens. A review published in the journal Diabetes Care found that magnesium deficiency was documented in 48% of outpatients with type 2 diabetes. In patients with poorly controlled type 2 diabetes, that number approached 68%. The correlation between low magnesium and elevated HOMA-IR, the insulin resistance index, is statistically robust across multiple independent studies. 1 cup of cooked spinach delivers 37% of your daily magnesium requirement. Available at every grocery store in America. Under $2 a bag. A published study found that consistent daily consumption of leafy greens improved insulin sensitivity by up to 12.7% over 6 weeks. Verdict on spinach. Its magnesium content directly addresses the enzymatic step that fires the insulin signaling chain. The evidence is mechanistic, epidemiologically consistent, and clinically meaningful. But spinach is the weakest case on this list. Number 4 is where it gets specific. Quick note. If you've been waking up with high fasting blood sugar, even after eating well all day, even after a good night's sleep, that specific mechanism is covered in a separate video. I'll link it in the description. The overnight glucose process and what these vegetables do during the day are 2 separate systems. Both matter. Keep that in mind as we go through this list. Number 4. Okra. Most people either cook it wrong, avoid it entirely, or have never considered it as anything beyond a southern side dish. That's a mistake. Okra, Abomascius esculentus, contains something called mucilage, the thick, gelatinous substance that's released when you cut an okra pod. Most people cook it away. Most people don't know they're discarding medicine. A meta-analysis published in 2025 pooled 6 randomized controlled trials of okra supplementation in type 2 diabetic patients. Okra supplementation significantly reduced fasting blood glucose and meaningfully reduced glycated hemoglobin across all trials combined. 2 separate mechanisms explain why. First, the mucilage polysaccharides slow digestion. They form a viscous barrier in the small intestine that physically slows glucose absorption after meals, blunting the blood sugar spike that drives the inflammatory cascade attacking your insulin receptors. Second, okra contains a flavonoid called myricetin. In cell studies and animal models, myricetin improves insulin sensitivity by activating glucose transporter 4, GLUT4, through a pathway that partially bypasses the damaged insulin receptor signaling chain altogether. Think about what that means. When the receptor signal is too weak to open the glucose channel normally, myricetin can help open it through a different route. Ancient Egyptian healers used okra specifically for what they called sweet urine disease. They observed the outcome without knowing the mechanism. We now know the mechanism. It is documented in peer-reviewed literature. 1 preparation rule. Do not boil okra to softness and discard the liquid. That gel you're draining away? That's the therapeutic compound. Roast it. Stir-fry it briefly. Or slice it raw into a salad. Frozen okra at most major grocery stores. Under $2 a bag. Verdict on okra. 6 randomized controlled trials, fasting glucose reduction confirmed, insulin sensitivity mechanism identified at the cellular level. The evidence is clinical, not theoretical. Number 3 directly attacks the inflammation that is destroying your insulin receptors right now. Number 3. Bitter melon. Stay with me. I know the name doesn't inspire confidence, but bitter melon, Momordica charantia, has more extensively published clinical evidence for diabetes than almost any other single vegetable in the peer-reviewed literature. Over 200 identified bioactive compounds, multiple human randomized controlled trials, and a mechanism that researchers have confirmed operates on the same cellular pathway your medication targets. With one critical difference. Your medication activates a cellular energy sensor called AMPK by inhibiting mitochondrial complex 1. It partially blocks cellular energy production to trigger AMPK. Bitter melon activates AMPK through a different chemical route, through triterpenoid compounds acting on upstream enzymes without the mitochondrial inhibition. The result at AMPK is similar. The pathway getting there is different. That makes them complementary, not redundant. Additionally, Bitter melon contains a compound called polypeptide P, which binds directly to insulin receptors and activates GLUT4 translocation in a manner described in published research as insulin mimetic, meaning it mimics insulin's action directly. And its component chirantin activates PPAR-gamma, the nuclear receptor that regulates insulin sensitivity at the level of gene expression. This is the same receptor targeted by a class of prescription diabetes drugs. Bitter melon activates it without the cardiovascular side effects that led one of those drugs to be restricted in 2010. 3 separate mechanisms. 1 vegetable. A 12-week randomized placebo-controlled study in patients with prediabetes showed bitter melon extract significantly reduced glucagon levels and blood glucose responses after a glucose tolerance test. In older subjects specifically, the high-dose group showed a significant reduction in glycated hemoglobin. A separate, double-blind placebo-controlled trial in type 2 diabetic patients whose medication had failed to achieve treatment goals showed significant improvement in blood glucose parameters with bitter melon extract. Where to find it? Indian grocery stores, Asian markets, and Caribbean grocery stores across America. Under $2 per piece, fresh. Bitter melon powder at Indian grocery stores for under $5. The bitterness reduces significantly when you slice it, remove the seeds, and lightly stir-fry it with garlic. Verdict on bitter melon. Multiple human randomized controlled trials. 3 separate insulin sensitizing mechanisms confirmed in published research, complementary to your current medication rather than competing with it. But number 2 is the one that made Margaret go straight home and change what was on her plate. Before we get there, a deeper look at ceramides. Because this is the mechanism most people managing insulin resistance have never heard about. And once you understand it, the rest of this list makes complete sense. You remember ceramides from the mechanism overview. Let me go deeper. Ceramides are fat molecules that your cells produce as part of normal metabolism. The problem arises when they accumulate in excess inside your muscle cells and liver cells. They accumulate when dietary saturated fat is high, when oxidative stress is elevated, when the inflammation driven by chronically elevated blood sugar is sustained over years, which, for most people watching this, has been happening for a long time. Inside the cell, ceramides block AKT, protein kinase B, the central switch in the insulin signaling chain. When insulin binds your receptor, the signal travels through a pathway to AKT. AKT then triggers GLUT4 translocation, the process that moves glucose transporters to the cell surface so glucose can enter. When ceramides block AKT, the transporters don't move. Glucose stays in your bloodstream. Your doctor measures this as insulin resistance on your HOMA-IR score. But what they're measuring is the downstream consequence of ceramide-driven AKT inhibition. Here is the clinical implication that matters. The same ceramide accumulation driving insulin resistance in your muscle cells is also operating in your liver. The same liver your medication is working to suppress. Both are downstream of the same ceramide pathway. Number 2 addresses that pathway upstream. Number 2. Broccoli. Broccoli contains a compound called sulforaphane, and sulforaphane does something to insulin resistance that no other compound in a common vegetable has been shown to do. It inhibits ceramide production. Specifically, sulforaphane inhibits the expression of a gene called SPTLC3, the gene that encodes the rate-limiting enzyme in ceramide biosynthesis. Less enzyme activity means less ceramide produced. Less ceramide means less AKT inhibition. The insulin signaling chain begins firing more completely. Glucose uptake improves. A 4-week parallel randomized, double-blind placebo-controlled study gave 81 type 2 diabetic patients 10 grams per day of broccoli sprout powder. The results: fasting serum insulin reduced by 18.2%. Insulin resistance as measured by HOMA-IR reduced by 14.2%. 14.2% reduction in measured insulin resistance in 4 weeks from broccoli. A separate 12-week randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study published in Nature Microbiology gave patients with prediabetes broccoli sprout extract. Glucose tolerance improved. The researchers then removed sulforaphane from the extract to confirm. The effect disappeared entirely. Sulforaphane was the active mechanism. Sulforaphane also activates NRF2, the master antioxidant regulator in your body, which reduces the oxidative stress driving the inflammatory cascade that damages IRS1. That means broccoli addresses both the ceramide mechanism and the inflammation mechanism simultaneously. Now, here is the preparation rule, and this one matters. Chopping broccoli releases an enzyme called myrosinase. Myrosinase converts the sulforaphane precursor, glucoraphanin, into active sulforaphane. That conversion takes approximately 10 minutes at room temperature. If you put chopped broccoli directly into boiling water, the heat destroys myrosinase before the conversion can happen. Studies show this reduces sulforaphane yield by up to 90%. Chop. Wait 10 minutes. Then steam, roast, or lightly stir-fry. That 10-minute window is the single preparation step that determines whether you're eating medicine or fiber. Broccoli sprouts. Available at Trader Joe's and the health food sections of many larger grocery stores, contain 10 to 100 times more glucoraphanin per gram than mature broccoli. 1 tablespoon raw on a salad, no cooking required. Verdict on broccoli. 2 separate human randomized controlled trials. 14.2% HOMA-IR reduction in 4 weeks. Ceramide inhibition mechanism confirmed. NRF2 anti-inflammatory pathway activation confirmed. And now, number 1. I want you to understand the significance of what I'm about to present. Number 1 is not a conventional vegetable. It is the root of a plant used in traditional medicine for over 3,000 years. In American grocery stores, it is sold as a supplement in the vitamin aisle. In the peer-reviewed literature, it has been studied in more randomized controlled trials for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes than almost any other plant-derived compound. And it has never appeared on a standard treatment plan. Not because the evidence is insufficient, for a reason I'll explain at the end. Number 1. Berberine. Berberine is derived from the berberis plant. It is classified botanically as a plant compound. In your local Walmart or Target, it sits in the supplement aisle for under $20. A meta-analysis published in Frontiers in Endocrinology pooled 46 randomized controlled trials of berberine in type 2 diabetic patients. The results across all 46 trials: HbA1c reduced by 0.73%. Fasting plasma glucose meaningfully reduced. Postprandial blood glucose significantly reduced. HOMA-IR, the insulin resistance index, reduced by 0.71. Fasting insulin reduced by over 2 units per milliliter. All statistically significant, across 46 separate trials. 3 mechanisms explain this. First, berberine activates AMPK through the same pathway as your medication, mitochondrial complex 1 inhibition. It tells the cell to open glucose channels. Second, berberine increases the expression and membrane movement of GLUT4, promoting glucose uptake at the muscle cell level, independently of how well your receptor signaling is working. Third, berberine inhibits alpha-glucosidase in the small intestine, the enzyme that breaks complex carbohydrates down into glucose. The same mechanism as the prescription drug acarbose. 3 mechanisms, 1 supplement. Under $20 for a 3-month supply. A clinical trial published in the journal Metabolism directly compared berberine to metformin in treatment-naive type 2 diabetic patients. The finding? Berberine and metformin produced comparable reductions in fasting blood glucose and A1C over 3 months. A head-to-head comparison. In a peer-reviewed journal that your doctor has access to. An umbrella meta-analysis published in Clinical Therapeutics pooled all existing meta-analyses on berberine. The conclusion? Berberine supplementation significantly reduced fasting blood glucose, HbA1c, HOMA-IR, insulin, interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, and C-reactive protein across all analyzed populations. The inflammation, the insulin resistance index, the blood sugar, the A1C, all of them, from one plant compound. Not prescribed, not covered on your treatment plan. Why? Because it is not patentable. There is no pharmaceutical company funding the continuing medical education that would place it on a treatment protocol. That is not a conspiracy. That is an economic reality of how medical education is funded in America. I want to be direct with you about something, because I know what some of you are thinking. You may be asking, if berberine is comparable to my medication, should I just take berberine instead? No. Berberine does not replace your medication. It addresses different downstream mechanisms. Your medication suppresses hepatic glucose output. It tells your liver to release less glucose between meals. Berberine does not do that with the same consistency. The correct framing is not either or. The correct framing is, what is my medication not doing? And the answer is specific. Your medication is not reducing your ceramide accumulation. Broccoli is. Your medication is not activating GLUT4 through myricetin's bypass pathway. Okra is. Your medication is not correcting the magnesium deficiency, reducing your insulin receptor tyrosine kinase efficiency. Spinach is. Your medication is not reducing the TNF-alpha and interleukin-6 inflammatory proteins attacking your IRS1. Berberine, bitter melon, and broccoli all are. These are not alternative treatments. They are the missing half of a treatment plan that manages symptoms while causes go unaddressed. Before the protocol, 3 combinations that cancel the benefit of everything on this list. Do not combine. 1. This vegetable list alongside a diet high in ultra-processed foods. Phosphate additives in processed deli meats, packaged breads, and flavored dairy products continuously restock the TNF-alpha and interleukin-6 inflammatory load that your vegetables are working to reduce. You cannot fully counteract a breakfast of processed turkey on white toast with a cup of sweetened yogurt with 5 grams of added sugar. Not even with perfect vegetable intake. The vegetables work against the inflammation. Processed food keeps reloading it. Do not combine. 2. Berberine with blood sugar lowering medications without monitoring. Berberine lowers blood glucose through multiple pathways. Combined with sulfonylureas, metformin, or insulin, the additive effect may push readings below 70 milligrams per deciliter. That is not a reason to avoid berberine. It is a reason to monitor your fasting blood sugar more frequently when you begin. If your readings start dropping below 90 consistently, inform your prescribing doctor. Your medication dose may need adjusting. For many patients, that adjustment is the intended outcome. Do not combine. 3. Cooking methods that destroy the active compounds. Specifically, boiling broccoli without the 10-minute rest destroys up to 90% of sulforaphane yield. Boiling okra to softness and discarding the liquid removes the mucilage gel, the therapeutic compound. For both of these, preparation method determines whether you are eating medicine or fiber. Here is Margaret's protocol. The one she built after asking her doctor the question no one had ever asked before. Daily, non-negotiable, 1 cup of cooked spinach alongside breakfast. Briefly boiled, water drained. This is your magnesium baseline, correcting the enzymatic deficiency that is impairing receptor activation every single day. Daily, alongside the spinach or as a separate morning preparation. 1 serving of broccoli or 1 tablespoon of broccoli sprouts. If mature broccoli, chopped, rested 10 minutes, then steamed or roasted. If sprouts, raw, directly on food. No cooking required. 4 mornings per week, okra. 6 to 8 pods, roasted or lightly stir-fried. Not boiled to softness, not microwaved until limp. The gel must remain intact. 3 to 4 evenings per week, bitter melon. Half a bitter melon, seeded, sliced thin, lightly stir-fried with olive oil and garlic. On evenings when fresh is unavailable, 1 teaspoon of bitter melon powder in warm water before dinner. Available at Indian grocery stores for under $5. Daily, berberine supplement. 500 milligrams twice daily, once with breakfast, once with dinner. This matches the dosing used in the clinical trials. Doctor's Best, Now Foods, and Thorne all make well-formulated versions. Under $20 for a 90-day supply at major retailers. Track 2 numbers. Your fasting blood sugar every morning. Write it down. A notebook on the nightstand is sufficient. And your HOMA IR at your next lab visit. Ask your doctor to include it on your blood work panel. It can be calculated from a standard fasting insulin draw alongside your fasting glucose. Most labs can run it routinely. HOMA IR is the number that tells you whether this plan is actually working at the root. Not just the blood sugar reading, the resistance index itself. A note for those with type 1 diabetes. Broccoli's sulforaphane mechanism, ceramide inhibition and NRF2 activation, is relevant regardless of diabetes type. The inflammatory pathway attacking your insulin receptors operates the same way. Okra and spinach similarly apply to post-meal glucose management. A note for those who have been on long-term medication for more than 5 years. There is something that medication may be quietly doing to your body, completely separate from blood sugar management, separate from insulin resistance, that accelerates the very complications you're working to prevent. Not a failure of the medication. Not a dangerous side effect. A depletion of a specific nutrient your body can no longer absorb properly when that medication is present in your gut daily, for years. I've made a separate video on exactly that. What the depletion is, what it does to your peripheral nerves and your energy metabolism, and how to correct it alongside your medication, not instead of it. If you've been on your medication for more than 5 years, that video is important for you. Link is in the description. Drop "I choose food" in the comments if you're going to add at least one of these 5 to your plate this week. And before you go, Margaret asked her doctor which medication actually fixes the insulin resistance. The honest answer was that the medications manage the blood sugar while the resistance continues. But here is what her doctor did not say, and what I want you to hear. The answer to the mechanism your treatment plan is missing: it grows. It sits in a freezer bag. It costs under $2. It just never made it onto the protocol. Until now.